Hello, welcome to this new set of videos on using classroom observation to produce outstanding lessons. It's becoming increasingly clear that classroom observation and feedback is the main tool for producing outstanding results in schools. It's also clear that badly done observation can be a torture for teachers and can be wholly ineffective. Over the past several years, John Bayley has been developing a method of observation and feedback in schools that takes account both of the changes in Ofsted criteria and, perhaps more importantly, of international research on effective teaching. He and I have worked together to produce this set of videos to explain the process as clearly as we can. So here we are doing another set of videos on classroom observation. Why do we need a new set?
We need a new set because things have moved on quite considerably since we made the previous videos, which was not 2 years ago now. And partly because Ofsted have changed what they do, but also because we're constantly learning and improving what we do based on the considerable number of schools and teachers that we work with. The key driving force has been looking for a way of evaluating lessons that doesn't rely on tick lists. Ofsted now say that their criteria in the framework aren't suitable for individual classroom observations. They're very specific about that, and that their criteria are designed for whole school observations. And we felt the need, therefore, to re-look at the criteria that we used based on the previous Ofsted framework, based extensively on progress and learning of students, and look for a different way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. I also understand that Ofsted have something to say about individual professional judgment.
Yes, they do. Because we can't use the Ofsted framework and the criteria in it to observe individual lessons, if you ask Ofsted what you use instead, they'll say that it's down to the individual professional judgment of their Ofsted inspectors to make judgments within the lesson based on their experience. We've taken a significant view that if Ofsted inspectors can exercise their professional judgment, there's absolutely no reason why individual teachers in schools and senior managers in schools can't do the same. And therefore a significant focus that we have now on our observation process with people or in observing people is for them to exercise professional judgment through the process we use.
So could you sketch out that new framework for me?
Yes, we've thought very hard about how not to have a checklist mentality and a tick list mentality. Lots of schools use that, and we wanted to introduce a different and much more effective way of doing things with them and work with them on that. So we have three main elements of what we do. The first of them we called Pegs for Learning, which is a shorthand really, for a series of triggers within a lesson that focus the lesson extensively on students and their outcomes and on progress. And those pegs are very clear learning objectives, which are linked to subject skills and which are capable of being evaluated in terms of progress. We do a lot of work on that. The second link to that very extensively are some learning outcomes, which are what students need to do during the course of the lesson to fulfil the learning objectives. And in turn, we link those to a measurable process through levels or grade descriptors. The next is returning to those at frequent points in the lesson. There's no point in introducing those at the beginning, forgetting all about them, students not knowing what the focus is, and maybe not having time to return to them at the end of the lesson. And we call them staging posts of evaluation during the course of the lesson, when we encourage teachers and indeed students to return to the objectives and the outcomes and provide some evidence about what's been learnt so far at different stages in the lesson. How do we know whether they're learning or not? Sometimes they tell us, we ask questions, the teacher asks questions, and we know by international research that feedback from students and to students is one of the key driving forces of progress, that it leads to much more substantial progress with groups of children than anything else which happens in a school or a classroom. We look at their books, and we get students to talk us through what they're doing and what they've done over time. And we work with teachers on questioning, drawing in hiders and avoiders, the students who don't make eye contact because they want a quiet life. They might know it, but we don't know. We then look at teacher behaviours. Although we're getting a real focus on students, clearly the teacher's an important element in what happens in a lesson. And we do know from our own experience and what students tell us that teachers talk too much in lessons. And what we're trying to do is getting students to do much more for themselves, to work harder than the teacher. We call it active learning, or students taking responsibility for their own learning, activities that challenge them, encouraging them to make mistakes. Lots of teachers want them to get it right first time and spend lots of time telling them how to get it right, whereas we're trying to encourage students and teachers to get it wrong and learn by it and not get it wrong again. And then finally, we look at a couple of strands. One of them is the progress of individuals or groups within the classroom, very much linked to the Ofsted groupings of children on free school meals, children with English as additional language needs, special educational needs, and the very important key strands of literacy and numeracy development.
Is that it?
No, in addition to the pegs for learning, we have two other strands that we look at. And this sounds complicated, but we'll talk more later on about how those are woven together and used very simply in the observation process. The second key area that we use is based on the Ofsted term, which they use quite frequently, of engagement. So typically when Ofsted look at a lesson, an Ofsted inspector will feed back to the teacher briefly at the end of a lesson and say, well, students were engaged or students weren't engaged, but they don't define it. Nowhere in the framework is there a definition of engagement, and that might be different for different inspectors. What we've come up with teachers and indeed with students is what engagement might mean and what it might look like in a classroom. And typically it would mean that students know what to do and are very clear about what to do. They know how to improve. They know how to tackle the tasks and get on quickly with them and stay on task with them. They are aware of their own progress, and therefore they understand their starting points in terms of their level or their grade and where they need to get to in a lesson. They both answer questions confidently and articulately using keywords, subject keywords, but they also start to ask their own questions and start to question what they're doing in the lesson. And last but not least, they demonstrate evident enjoyment and focus in what they're doing, an absolute key constituent of learning. The last area, Ofsted term again, is the essence of a good or outstanding lesson. Now that sounds a bit vague. We've tried to translate the Ofsted criteria without using them as a checklist into a series of bullet points or phrases, key phrases. Two typical examples of that, again focusing on progress, would be the Ofsted term for an outstanding lesson in terms of progress, which would be progress is rapid and sustained. For a good lesson, the key term would be progress is consistently strong. And the kind of discussion we have with teachers and with co-observers is, what exactly does that mean? What does the teacher have to do in practice, and what students have to do in practice to actually achieve the essence or the culture or the feel of those two terms, and what's the difference between them?
John, that's an awful lot of stuff. Do we expect teachers to take all this on in one go?
No, we work over a period of time, both with individual teachers and with schools, and we have developed a four-stage process to do that. And that four-stage process will deal with each of those elements, or some of them combined, and we'll work in different ways with different individual teachers and different schools.